Hello, and welcome to the Disability Myth. My name is Dominic, and I live with a fatal disease called spinal muscular atrophy. Together, my amazing caretaker, co-host, and best friend, Uriel, and I plan to debunk misconceptions, share our personal experiences, and shatter your expectations. But we're not stopping there. We're bringing in experts, thought leaders, and everyday people who are smashing through societal barriers, paving the way for a more inclusive world. Whether you're tuning in to learn, empathize, or simply to be entertained, the show promises to be an eye-opening experience that transcends boundaries. Because when it comes down to it, what makes us different is what makes us extraordinary. Welcome back to another episode of the Disability Myth. I am, of course, your handsome and humble host, Dominic Trevathan. Alongside me, as usual, is Uriel. What's up, man? How you doing today?
Pretty good.
Nice. You excited for this episode?
Yeah. It's one of those episodes that just came naturally to us when I came over for work. We were talking about we were slamming our heads against the wall to come up with a topic. And then I pointed at your controller and I said gaming.
Gaming. You said, you know what? We're a couple of gamers. We should do an episode on gaming.
Well, it's more than just gaming. We it kind of evolved
Mhm.
into a more broader topic.
Right. We realize our audience probably is not entirely gamers, sadly,
Mm,
unfortunately.
Nah,
But
we got gamers.
we got a few. We got a few.
Yeah.
But I think the general consensus was in order for people with disabilities to game, there has to be a lot of times, not for everyone, but for some people, some level of assistance. And that assistance can be thought of as assistive technology.
Oh
So
yeah.
that's what today's episode is all about: assistive technology, assistive devices in general. The myth that we thought we would delve into today is the generalization, or I think outsider assumption. If I was an outsider looking into the disability world,
hmm
I think I would find myself making the assumption that assistive technology is accessible to everyone. Now, personally, I feel that this myth is inaccurate because if we look at disability from a spectrum perspective, like we've talked about before, there's a spectrum of mobility. And we know because of that, there are a plethora of different ways that one can be affected by their limitations. Therefore, the accessibility needs of everyone on that spectrum will probably be a little bit different,
Yeah.
which complicates things when you're trying to find an accessible device that works for you.
Right. Because from SMA to spinal cord injury to cerebral palsy, it's or even just something as simple as uh arthritis or something. Like maybe you banged yourself
Arthritis,
up. Yeah.
blindness, there are blind gamers and deaf gamers.
Oh, that's that. Yep. Yep. That too.
Yeah,
Uh, and even video games could also be kind of a fun hobby or a form of escapism or something to entertain or something to enjoy, especially for those that have cognitive disabilities, something like nice and casual, nothing necessarily competitive, but just something to do, right?
right.
You know. So it's kind of it's one of those wide overcasting hobbies that is just out there and has become really popular in the past couple of decades.
Right. Now, in the hours of research that you and I both did on gaming, assistive devices in general, we found, I think, two primary barriers that keep them from being what I would call accessible. And these two barriers are money and setup or external able-bodied help, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Some of these controllers and uh accessories don't come cheap, and we were quite surprised or taken aback by. I guess there wasn't really any surprise. I guess we didn't really have any expectations in looking at this stuff, and then the prices just kind of shot at us like, whoa.
Right. Well, and it's like I said, as an outsider looking in, I was kind of expecting a little bit more, I guess. But after looking at the price tags, looking at what's currently available, it's pretty limited. And there are these barriers in place that we will get into. But before we do, um, I want to go ahead and define what exactly assistive technology is or assistive devices. Typically, they're thought of as assistive, adaptive, or rehabilitative devices for people with disabilities. And typically speaking, that does include the elderly. Um, I think that's a big demographic of people living with disabilities, probably the largest.
Yes, because we all get older, we all
We all
slow
do.
down. Yeah.
I forget where we heard it, but one of our friends was even telling us 80% of people at some point in their lives live with a disability.
Oh,
So,
for sure. Because wear and tear, your body just breaks down, injuries happen,
right.
your body just degrades. The brutal reality of it.
Yep. So, people living with disabilities in some often have difficulty performing what we call activities of daily living, or
I
they'll
believe there's
just,
an acronym for that, right?
yeah, it's
Some
or
people might.
ADL, your ADLs, I
Yeah, there
think
we
they call
go.
it
Yeah,
in it's hospital lingo, I think.
right.
Um, but yeah, so in other words, people living with disabilities will oftentimes need assistance with these ADLs. And typically, when you think of ADLs, you think of like going to the restroom, showering, making breakfast or dinner, making yourself a meal. But for 25-year-old dudes like me, it's that means gaming. So,
Yeah.
there's the point being there's a wide spectrum of ADLs that people living with disabilities um, encounter in their day-to-day lives. And assistive technology or assistive devices can include really common things such as hearing aids, wheelchairs, communication aids, spectacles or glasses, prosthetics, pill organizers, memory aids. These are all examples of assistive devices. So it's a pretty kind of wide spectrum of things. And admittedly, we're probably not going to cover everything today. We are only two boys here. But
Men.
we're going to take a shot at it and highlight some pretty cool, interesting, important, relevant ones to us at least. So yeah, we figured we'd start off this episode by talking, dedicating a little section to gaming. Now, so given my SMA, my spinal muscular atrophy, as a gamer, the biggest hurdles I face are fatigue and pulling triggers.
Mm.
Because of my SMA, I tend to get really fatigued after, I'd say about 30 minutes to an hour straight of gaming, which it's tough because when I was a kid, like 12, 13, when I was in my prime, in my peak gaming years, I I don't know if this is a, good thing to say on such a public space, but I would game for 4 or 5 hours straight, right? Without taking breaks. And nowadays it's a lot harder because I don't have the energy due to the general kind of degradation of my energy levels over as I've gotten older.
I relate to that big time. Even me as an able-bodied person, just if I don't get 8 hours of sleep, and also like my eyes, the strain, whatever,
Yep.
and just being in a position for too long, even though I'm 26, it's
Yeah.
I can go long periods of time gaming, but is it comfortable? No, because there's special like sweet zone where maybe after the third hour I have to take a break, because anything after that it just becomes uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And then for you, what's your range? Usually at least an hour. Usually after an hour you got to take like a short break.
Yeah. So usually like I can play for an hour or so and then I just need to take a little 15, 20 minute break at least usually.
Luckily, that's like what one Madden match.
Luckily.
Yeah.
It's tough when I'm playing, you know, like survival games like Ark because I just get so involved in it and sucked in, and I just lose track of time. And before I know it, I'm playing for like almost 2 hours. And at that point, I've been playing so much that I literally cannot move my hand to my controller for my wheelchair
You start
because
cramping.
it's so weak. It's not that it's cramping, it's just so weak and so stiff from my arm being in the same position for so
Right.
long
Mhm.
and my fingers jamming all those buttons for so long.
Yeah.
My hand and my wrist and my arm are just super stiff, fatigued. I'm tired. I'm sweaty. And I just kind of have to sit there for like, you know, 10, 15 minutes if I go too long and wait for my, you know, energy level to come back a little so I can move my arm to my controller joystick on my wheelchair and do what I need to do,
Yeah.
aka go to the restroom.
I mean, that's also relatable. Those survival games are tricky because it's not like a competitive Madden thing where you could just play a competitive game, set it down, and like take a break. With,
Right.
like, for example, in your case, Arc, you're setting little mini goals. What feels like every 5, 10, 15 minutes, like, oh, after I do this thing that takes 15 minutes, I got to do this other thing. And it's this constant flow of activities where it's kind of hard to dictate when and where I want to take a break. I could take a break now, but I could do this real quick, which is what, a 15-minute activity. Well, that's how I feel especially when I play Minecraft, man. But anyway, let's get into it. In our research, uh, the two main big companies, as most people are familiar with, Xbox, Sony, or I should say Microsoft, Xbox, Sony, PlayStation. Those are the two biggest consoles at the moment. And both of them have created an accessible controller. I believe the Xbox one's already out. I forget when they're set to release or when they're scheduled to release. I think Sony's is still in the oven, maybe. They revealed it, but
Yeah. So Xbox is already out. It's been out for a few years now, actually.
okay.
Their adaptive controller and PlayStation's aka Project Leonardo, as it was classified, very, you know, coolly for a
Mm,
long time. Their accessible controller is coming out this December. And so yeah, like you said, we kind of wanted to get into these two competitors on the market and analyze them. Now, admittedly, I have never used an accessible controller myself.
right.
I'm I try to use the regular controller to the best of my ability. And what that means for me is simply just changing the controller bindings in my settings on my PlayStation 5,
Mhm.
which for anyone interested, I'll tell you how to do real quick. All you got to do is go to settings, click accessibility, select your controller, custom button assignments for DualSense wireless controller. And from there, you'll see the map of buttons, and you can simply tap the one that you want to change and tap the button that you want to change it to. And it's simple as that. So that's how I play. Well, and I don't change every button. Basically, like I was mentioning earlier, the biggest hurdles I face when playing are the fatigue and pushing the trigger buttons, which are on the back side of your controller, generally speaking. And they generally require a bit more force to pull them. It's not like a simple button to push with your thumb. You have to use your index fingers to pull them usually. So what I will do is I like to switch the left trigger and the right trigger to the left bumper and right bumper,
Mhm.
which essentially are more like buttons than actual triggers. The bumper buttons, they're a little bit higher on the controller and they act more like a button than a trigger. So it's a little bit easier for me to push.
Yeah, and then maybe you should, how do I describe it? The way you grip onto your controller, it's kind of, oh gosh. it's situated in a way where you don't actually have to wrap your finger around the triggers to pull it like one would
Right.
normally would. It's kind of a more of a pushing motion,
Right,
kind of weird
exactly.
T-Rex claw. I don't know how to describe it.
Yeah, very
You
akin
know?
to the T-Rex claw pose.
Yeah.
I think we'll probably end up posting a picture of
Photo.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah, or maybe even do a video. Maybe we'll get creative.
Oh,
I
sure.
don't know. You'll see when this episode drops.
Yeah. Um, but so yeah, as Dominic specified earlier, I think our biggest complaints about either controller is that they're pretty pricey, and it's not the case for every person with a disability, right? But with SSI limitations, some people might struggle
Yeah.
to
Well,
afford or finance one of these.
I think what we've especially touched on in the last episode on motivation was the fact that we not only have a lot of money, typically if we're on Social Security, but it's a challenge to work and find work. So
Mhm.
it's not like we have a lot of excess money for recreational purposes in the first place,
Right.
which I feel is one of the primary barriers here to these assistive controllers being very accessible. So just to kind of break it down, I went on the PlayStation 5 website, or not the PlayStation 5 website, but PlayStation site, and I went through and I looked at the cost of one controller of that new one they're coming out with in December, their accessible controller. So when you order that controller, this is what comes in the box. You get the base controller, which is like a disc shaped, it almost looks like a frisbee that you have buttons on that you push. So yeah, it's a disc shaped controller. It comes with the USB cable. It comes with 8 pillow button caps, which are the buttons that you have to kind of assemble yourself onto the controller or switch them to your preference. It comes with, again, 4 flat button caps, 4 curved button caps, 2 overhang button caps, 1 wide flat button cap, a standard stick cap, a dome stick cap, and a ball stick cap. And these stick caps are the joystick essentially that you would move your character with in the game. It also comes with 23 tags, which would be of the actual button labels. So like X, O, triangle, square, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And it comes with, of course, the quick start guide and the safety guide, all at a price of $90.
Right. But that's just the bare.
Right.
It's essentially like a little disc that clamps onto a table or a desk with a joystick. And I don't think those covers are actually like buttons that you could push down. They're just coverings, like label things.
Right. So again, I'm an outsider looking in. I've never used this controller. I've watched a couple of YouTube videos on it, researched it a little bit, and my first take when looking at this is okay, you get a disc of buttons and one joystick. At least the way they show it on the website and in the videos, it's just the one disc and the one joystick that combine together. They all plug into the same disc. Typically speaking, when you're playing video games, whether it's like what I play in Madden or Ark, Minecraft, even, you need 2 joysticks, one to control your character
Yeah.
and one to control your camera, the left and the right, respectively. So I guess my kind of question mark with the Sony accessible controller is it makes it seem like you need to buy multiple controllers, multiple access controllers in order to be able to move left and right joysticks.
That was our initial thought.
Right.
But upon further research, I believe it's 3.5 millimeter jacks
Yeah.
that could be plugged into each of these little sections on the disc. And you could reprogram it for a button. For example, you could have you could theoretically, not theoretically, you can mount this to your table, and then we can find another separate joystick, like a third party joystick, and
Right.
stick it in with a 3.5 millimeter jack and use that as your camera joystick. Then I sent, but that's not your preferred setup, and it might not work for you.
Right. Again, it goes back to how accessible is it for each individual that needs to try and adapt their setup. For me, I prefer just to keep it simple, use a regular controller. I switch my button assignments as needed. And yeah, I get a little fatigued and tired after like an hour or so, but at this point in my life, I'm fine with that. I don't need really to be playing video games for more than an hour or two, anyways,
Right.
at a time. I'm getting up there in age. I'm no spring chicken
Busy
anymore.
men.
Exactly. We got a podcast for running. So,
Mhm.
but yeah, as Uriel said, there are, third party switches that you can plug in to these accessible controllers. Now, the website that we found when doing some research on the Sony and the Xbox controller, it's called ablenet.com, I believe. Let me
Mhm.
confirm. ablenetinc.com. So AbleNet seems to be a pretty popular website for getting
We
these
we found that website for someone that actually reviewed the actual Xbox controller,
right.
if I recall.
That they recommended it in the description of their YouTube video. So we checked
Mhm.
it out. And the switches that plug into both the Xbox and the coming out soon PlayStation controller, they have a 3.5 millimeter jack that plugs into the controllers, no problem. It's pretty much like the industry standard, it seems, that 3.5 millimeter jack. These switches, which you can set up wherever on your chair, or wherever you set up for your gaming, they come for as cheap as $75 on ablenetinc.com, which personally, in my mind, I'm not the richest man in the world.
Yeah, it's a little much, huh?
I wouldn't call it necessarily cheap
Or
just for
affordable. Yeah.
just for one switch, for one button, essentially.
Right.
That's kind of my argument here. Like my problem with this, again, I could be entirely mistaken, but the way this seems to me is if, I want to map my L2 button, my trigger L2 to one of these switches for one button, I'm paying $75 for convenience for me, which does not seem super accessible.
Right. But then my counter argument, at first I thought, oh, this controller sucks. But then once I saw the programmability of it and the fact that it uses 3.5 millimeter inputs, it started blowing my mind a bit
Yeah,
because sometimes I like to go to the flea markets, the swap meets, whatever you want to call them. And there are so many 3.5 millimeter jack, like random switches and stuff that you could just find out there in the wild, even on eBay. And it really opens up a wide variety of possibilities. For example, you could theoretic, I mean, not again, I always say theoretically, but you could most likely a chin switch, some sort of bite
yeah,
switch, and then you could like set a switch next to your head on your chair, right? It's like there's a lot of possibilities there. Even heck of a 3.5 millimeter jack, maybe even a piano foot pedal, like straight up,
yeah. For
is
people
just
that have like foot function, leg function, you can do straps or switches down there. Um,
right.
for me personally, if I was gonna like set something up for myself involving switches, I would probably set them like maybe one under each elbow. Since I do have some arm function, I can
Right.
like very slightly lift my elbows and push down with them. So yeah, no, they're definitely an option. It's just my other kind of counter argument to this counter argument is it requires that setup, right?
Right.
Which
You need someone to do it for
you
you.
probably need someone to
Yeah.
do it for you, someone to help you that's able to.
And then you have to set it up and then clean it up before and after every gaming session.
Right. So at that point, you got to ask yourself, how accessible is this for me?
Yeah, I think it's a step in the right direction.
Hmm.
And I think there's always going to be that need for someone to set it up for you or
Yeah,
do any sort of preparations. But that's something that, again, I believe most disabled people are used to, like some
yeah,
level of assistance to start something or do something or clean up or whatever, what have you.
with their ADLs, yeah,
Right.
yeah. So it's definitely the step in the right direction, and for a long time, and it still is technically the Xbox controller, adaptive controller, is the only adaptive controller that you can buy. So you have no other options as a
From a
person
major company.
from a major company. Yeah,
I'm not sure about third party options. You'd have to check
right. That's true.
because we mainly focused on like the two big boys,
Hmm.
the big companies.
Well, and the thing that's also kind of limiting about the Xbox One, albeit I guess they get a pass because it's their controller, is it only works for Xbox and computers, I think.
Yeah, because
Like,
Microsoft, right?
yeah, you can't just plug it into a PlayStation.
I, yeah, it's this is the corporation kind of thing. You want their things to only work for their
Yeah,
software. Their
yeah, that makes sense.
yeah,
But yeah, and speaking of the Xbox adaptive controller, I think our kind of initial thoughts on it were that, it's a big rectangular box that you
yeah.
would set down either on your lap or on a table in front of you. And it has like a few buttons on the front of it, on the face of it. It has a I forget the Xbox buttons because I haven't played one in forever, but I think it has a B button and an A button that are two large touchpads on the front of it. And then to the left of it are a few smaller buttons for like options to pause the game and whatnot. So you only have like four or five buttons on the actual face of the controller. But the thing about the Xbox that makes it really niche is it has a ton of plugins on the backside for you to plug in your switches to. And so, I'd say it's a really good first step in the right direction because it provides options for switches. Like you can kind of just, like Uriel was saying, plug in and mess around with your bindings to your heart's desire
Right.
and just figure out what works for you. My
And
only kind of my main kind of problem with it is just like we touched on a little bit a few minutes ago. It's a lot of setup and it it's not super intuitive because you have all these jacks that you have to plug in and
yeah, and then jack length, for example, cable length. You could find a really
yeah,
cool third party switch, but if it's too far away and it quite can't quite reach your foot or you need it to go, yeah, you might have again somebody if you're unable to was going to have to modify some of these switches possibly, and that requires not a whole lot of education, but research and now you're stripping wires and doing all sorts of stuff and like connecting
right.
wires together, right? To and that
Yep.
could be a little scary. And it's important to note in our research that I believe both Sony and Microsoft can these accessible controllers can still connect to a regular controller.
Yeah, well that was one of the big appeals with the Xbox One too is it has like a
Co-op or co-pilot.
co-pilot
Yeah.
has co-pilot mode. So what you can do is have the person with the disability use the assistive controller, but you can also have a more able-bodied person use a regular controller, but only like say half of the controller, like the right side of it, and
Mhm.
those buttons on that side of the controller. So essentially, the person with the disability is controlling the left side of the controller with the assistive controller, and the other person is controlling the right side of the controller, which again, never used one. It doesn't seem super easy or intuitive to me, but I recognize that for a lot of people, you know, they're they're probably not competitive gamers. Like
Yeah,
I sometimes
they don't
think
get as
I
sweaty as
am.
you.
Yeah.
When we were talking about this, we agreed that if you were ever to get your hands on the Sony adaptable controller, whatever, it would essentially be it connected to your regular controller because you could use a regular controller, and then you would map. I think we both agreed like on some sort of head, like elbow buttons or a button next to your head that you can just like move back and forth to hit start, select some of those buttons that you struggle to
Yeah.
like
Some weird
grab.
combination like that. Yeah, like
Yeah,
I could see myself using the adaptive controller with my left hand and then the right hand using the regular controller to control the right joystick and the buttons a little bit,
right.
something like that. But
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
no,
cool that the option exists. You
it's
know,
very cool. The Xbox controller, just FYI, generally runs about $100, depending on where you buy it. And again, our main kind of cons for that is just the setup.
right? And again, it's I know like 90, 100. It doesn't sound like a whole lot, but the thing that makes it costly is purchasing the Microsoft or the Sony branded switches.
Hmm.
And then we're arguing for, oh, there's plenty of third party options. You don't have to get specifically the Sony switches.
Right.
Just according to both websites, they say most 3.5 millimeter connection or switches should work.
Yeah.
So if you want to save some money, experiment a little bit.
Yep. At your own risk. Hmm.
Yes. And then we're gonna bleed into this next topic where it's just games have become a lot more accessible
Yeah.
in terms of options, settings, graphical options. They got colorblind options now, arachnophobia options, believe it or
Yeah.
not. You know,
Yeah. No, that was in Star Wars Jedi Survivor, right?
oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. You could turn off the spiders.
Yeah. So, in Star Wars Jedi Survivor, from my fellow Star Wars nerds out there and gamer nerds like me, I really enjoyed because it does have built-in controller remapping. So you don't have to go into your PlayStation 5 settings to do all your remapping. You can just do it for that game specifically. A lot of games for a long time have just don't have that option. Like Arc doesn't have a built-in remapping system in the settings. I have to go into my PlayStation settings and do it there.
Oh,
Um,
that sucks.
yeah. Well, hopefully that gets changed with the new remake coming out. So we'll see. Expect a full review on that in like 2 weeks when it comes out. I hope.
Hmm. Oh yeah.
But yeah,
Um.
Star Wars Jedi Survivor, it has pretty extensive accessibility options covering challenges for people who are colorblind, who may face mobility issues, such as myself. Although I won't say it's, the creme de la crop, I still had issues playing it. And maybe that's my own fault for not playing around with the settings more. But there are certain actions that I found kind of difficult, that I struggled with. There was a couple of challenges in the game called force tears, where
Oh yeah.
you have to interact with these random portals, and it takes you to like a boss fight or a big, huge group of enemies that you have to fight and kill within a certain amount of time. Which those types of challenges are always really hard for me because I can't move super fast. My like biggest nemesis in gaming is probably quick time events. For those who are unfamiliar, in gaming, quick time events are, how would you describe? It's like a cutscene that you watch in the game, but in order to progress and
Oh,
go through the cutscene,
the timing.
you have to push the
Yeah.
displayed buttons on the screen in
Right.
a really small amount of time, like extremely quickly. One of the most popular video games I think that plays a lot with QuickTime events is God of War.
Yeah.
For anybody who's played the old school God of War games,
There's a lot of those.
QuickTime events, QuickTime events, QuickTime events, like the whole game. Like you
Right.
cannot beat the game unless you can do the QuickTime events.
Yeah. And in order to make it more accessible and kind of retain that old school God of War feel, the newer games are really cinematic and the quick time events are really forgiving,
They are. Yeah.
right? And I think it got a lot of backlash, and I think that's dumb because I think this is arguably better because it's more cinematic and it feels like, oh,
Yeah,
the cutscenes are incredible, right?
exactly.
There's always going to be some backlash to all these accessibility options. I think those people don't if just don't use them.
Yeah. They're there if you need them. Yeah. Yeah, no, I really enjoyed God of War Ragnarok. I'm a big God of War fan, so I'm a little biased, but I I really enjoyed Ragnarok and its accessibility options too. Again, it has built-in controller remapping, uh same accessibility options for people that are colorblind and with mobility issues, probably more so than Jedi Survivor.
Right, because
Um,
you have parry and block. You could change those and then color indications for certain
right,
timings or whatever. It's
right.
really
A big mechanic in Ragnarok was just blocking and parrying attacks, and they made that very accessible. You can uh make the window for parrying bigger, and that's really helpful for people with mobility issues such as myself. So I appreciate that. And then, of course, there was a bunch of settings too for people that are colorblind that may only see certain colors. There's a bunch of different options for changing the visual indications that tell you as the player what type of attack is coming, because some attacks you can parry, some attacks you cannot. And if you try to, you will get hurt. They're unblockable. And so you have to dodge. So it's really important to be able to identify the type of attack coming
hmm.
and play accordingly. And so that's why I really like the plethora of options for the color of those attacks so you can, see them easier for those that are challenged.
And again, if you find it making the game too easy, just don't use them.
Again, yeah,
Yeah, like
exactly.
shut up. You know. Now, this is a quick question for you because you had mentioned it. Talk about your resistance to using this assistive technology when it comes to gaming, because you've mentioned it multiple times to me because of your SMA.
Mhm. So, like I've talked about on the podcast before, with my SMA, it gets worse as I get older. I am on treatment for it, Spinraza, that I get my injections every 4 months. And every time I get my injection for about a couple of weeks, I do feel a little bit more energy and that my movements are a bit easier. That being said, I still get tired and I do have my bad days. But gaming is admittedly something I do every day. I hope we don't lose followers because of this. They think I'm lame or something. But honestly, gaming is a really good workout for me because it keeps my fingers active, my hands active, even my arms a little active. And so I try to treat it as like a workout in some situations because I do get tired from it and like it's good movements for me. So not only do I enjoy gaming, but it's a good form of just, occupational therapy, if you will, for me.
Right,
And
keeps you
I kind of
moving.
I kind of feel the need to play every day too, because if I don't, then I lose my mobility. If I don't do the same actions I do every day on a regular basis, if I don't use the same muscles, then I lose them. And that's the nature of my disorder. The problem with SMA is it gets worse the less you use your muscles. So, yeah, that's why I try to game every day and keep my muscles active. And that's also why I kind of resist using assistive technology too, because if I go easy on myself and give in to just using assistive technology, then I won't be using the muscles that I normally used when I game.
Right.
For a few months, I was playing Poke MMO on my laptop, which requires me to use a lot different motions and muscles than it does to play games on my PlayStation. So what had happened was I played Poke MMO for a couple months straight on my laptop without playing much at all on my PlayStation. And when I got done with Poke MMO and I wanted to come back to my PlayStation, I realized I had lost a lot of mobility, like a lot of my motions to move my fingers and my hands were just not there. And it's not just like it's muscle memory where, if you don't do something for a couple of months and come back to it, that it'll just return to you all the movements. That's not the issue. It's literally that my fingers don't have the strength in them to push buttons as fast as they used to before the PlayStation hiatus, I'll call it, of 2023.
Yeah, and I maybe you could reiterate or bring it up, but SMA, the proteins and the bit of the biology behind it and why that's the case.
Yeah, so spinal muscular atrophy is a result of a genetic mutation in our DNA, extremely rare. You have a 0.0001 probability of obtaining it. And essentially, the way it works is your body does not produce enough of what we call SMN protein, survival of motor neuron protein. So, for those that are unaware, your motor neurons are what connects your brain function, your spinal cord to your muscles. So, if I tell my arm to move, it's going to move because of my motor neurons. And the problem in SMA is because we don't have enough of that protein produced in our bodies, the motor neurons, again, the kind of bridge between your brain and your muscles, they are not as functional. And in a lot of cases, depending on the type of SMA you have, they're not functional at all. So I can move my arm towards me relatively easily and contract my muscles that way pretty easily. But when it comes to pushing away or flexing, that's what I have a hard time doing, for example. And that's just, an example of how these motor neurons can affect you and the damage done to them can affect you. So that's why, you know, I try to be as active as I can on a daily basis by driving my chair, by feeding myself, playing games, all that stuff. It's not just my dailies, my active activities of daily living. It's kind of my routine of keeping my mobility in place. So, yeah.
Now, we started off this episode mentioning it, but assistance around the house.
Hmm.
Um, I know there's a couple of assistive technologies that you have in your house when I visit, for example, the Amazon Alexa
Yeah.
that you can
So,
use to turn light switches on and off, right? I know some people can use voice recognition to even turn their TVs off and on, I believe.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Amazon Alexa is a godsend for I think most people with disabilities, even people not with disabilities. It's just a really nice thing to have in the house. Especially when it's used in combination with smart devices like light bulbs. There's smart light bulbs that you can connect to a plug in the wall with your Alexa and it'll turn it on. So for instance, in my house, we have one here in the bedroom that I record and do my work in and stuff. And all I have to do is say, Alexa, light on, and it turns the light on. And that way I don't have to like struggle to try and flip a switch, or I don't have to have someone come in and turn the light on for me. I can just do it myself, thereby increasing my independence. And I've never tried this myself, but I did read a bit online that you can connect them to things such as Ring camera devices for outside, so you can control your camera, turn it off, turn it on, move it around. So that's really cool. Um,
Oh, that is pretty cool.
yeah, and I think the the big appeal for me too about Alexas and stuff like that is they're pretty cheap. Um,
Yeah, I remember when
I
it
couldn't
first came
find
out,
Chip
they're
in your
kind of,
Apple Music library. You can ask me to play a rate.
oh God, well, there you go.
that was my MacBook
Oh,
into me. The thing I like about the Alexas is they're relatively cheap. You know, you can go online and buy them the older generation like dots on Amazon for as cheap as 10 to 15 bucks. That being said, you do have to pay for the third party devices like the light bulbs and whatnot. But
yeah, but that's always going to be the one of the big issues with assistive technology is that you get the initial
mhm,
assistant device and then the accessories involved with it,
yeah,
like the light, like the smart light bulbs and all that.
yep. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the Amazon Alexa. Definitely advise people to check those out if you don't already have one. And you know, they're just great in general. Like they can wake you up in the mornings. I have mine to wake me
An
up as my
alarm.
alarm. So
We
yeah,
use that quite a lot.
get a good use out of it. Yeah.
Mhm. And then I know you're a big fan of speech to text
Yeah.
software.
Yeah. So I have not a ton of experience using different softwares. I have used Dragon, naturally speaking, and I know that's a really popular one, especially like for vocational rehabilitation centers. That's typically like the first software they'll recommend, I think, when you go to ask for help with some type of software like that.
What a kick-ass name too,
Speech to text.
Dragon.
What's that?
What a kick-ass name too, Dragon.
Oh yeah, Dragon.
Mhm.
Freaking sick. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of Dragon, to be honest.
Mm. I know you use speech to text quite a bit to help type.
Yeah. So at the risk of setting it off again, I do use Siri a lot.
You'll need to unlock your iPhone first.
I
Oh,
really
there it
hope my
is.
microphone picked that up. That's a
It
gem.
did. It's pretty loud. Yeah. Um,
So yeah, as you can tell, I have SIRE, and I use that a lot because it's just very convenient. I just have to, you know, say, "Hey, SIRE," you know,
yeah.
it'll start talking.
Right, right.
But yeah, I really like the way it works in just typing in general, like the speech to text. It works pretty well in my opinion, and I can get pretty precise with what I want. So if I'm writing something and I say I'm typing, uh, in this essay, comma, I will address the following, colon, beans, comma, tortillas, comma, and rice, period.
Yeah, I've seen you do it
It,
before. It's pretty
yeah,
accurate.
it'll pick up all your punctuation that you
Hmm.
mention wherever you mention it. And so I like that.
Uh,
My problem with Dragon is, again, I guess just I'm lazy, the setup. It requires you to not only install a software on your computer or your phone or whatever your device, it requires you to train your voice, or it requires you to train it to pick up your voice. So, whereas SIRE will just hear me and understand me pretty flawlessly most of the time, you have to train Dragon to understand your voice, which, you know, I think is extremely cool on one side because for people that aren't able to articulate as well as others, it's probably extremely helpful and they probably love Dragon. Me, myself, I'm good with just the SIRE.
ah. Um, yeah, and then I know we did a lot of research on the gaming thing because that's something we're passionate about, but there's a lot of other hobbies that we looked into. For example, if you're disabled and you're in the profession of writing or just personal writing, Dragon,
Mhm,
SIRE,
mhm.
um,
There's Microsoft's Cortana.
right. But one really cool thing that we found that could be free, depending on your situation, is the eye gaze technology. That stuff was really cool.
It's so cool.
Right.
It makes me want to get one, even though I don't need one.
You might qualify for one. It's maybe you could tell the audience about that real quick, the SSI kind of.
Yeah, so I guess, well, before we get into all that stuff, it's essentially a computer tablet that you have, and you can simply move your eyes, and it has a camera built into it that picks up your eye movement in order to have you command what you want it to do. And so when I went on the website and I initially looked at it, I was like, dang, this can do a lot of different stuff. You know, you can not only type with it and like do speech to text, or technically text to speech, because you're moving your eyes to type something and then it translates for you. It speaks. Think of like Stephen Hawking. He had, I think, one of the first eye gazes. So it's pretty cool. Yeah, you can do calling and texting with it. So it integrates with a cell phone via Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. So you can text, you can call, all that stuff. It works a lot. It works with a lot of different third-party devices too, like smart devices, like Alexas and whatnot. So you can communicate with Alexa using the eye gaze. Different sound systems, lights and switches with all that. It connects using somehow, I don't even know, infrared frequencies and radio waves. Sounds like something from like the future. But yeah, it's really cool. It does all this stuff, and according to the website, it's covered by Medicare and Medicaid. I shouldn't say it's covered, but it can be covered if you qualify, which is really cool because, in my mind, I would have expected you to have to buy it or kind of finagle your way to getting one with like a vocational rehab center or something like that. But yeah, I think it's an awesome device that looks like it can be covered if you qualify it through insurance. So
Mhm.
hats off to iGaze.
And then, oh gosh, there's a lot of options out there. It's even sensors, switches, or just devices that just make a sound, especially if you're blind and you're maneuvering for your house.
Yeah,
You could use sensors and they like let off a little noise to tell you how far away you are from certain corners or parts of the house. Stuff like that. It's crazy.
there's applications that you can put on your phone if you are blind that automate, like they vocalize to tell you, you know, if a street light is green or red, if you can cross the street or not. We live in a world where assistive technology is just everywhere, in the house and outside, which is so cool.
And it's only going to get better, but at the time it's a little, I would argue it's kind of in its infancy state. You could
Yeah,
argue, right? Because we've only been, well, it's funny saying modern, but this is modern, right? Where post pandemic and a bunch of people are now finding themselves disabled. There's definitely a huge market for it. And
definitely.
unfortunately, when doing some of the research, it's a little, because earlier we mentioned elderly people and how that's probably the biggest like group of disabled people is just elderly people.
Mm,
I know I was looking into home remodelings and just old people proofing your house. That's so expensive, man. And
yeah,
it comes back to the same problems where we have where if you're retired and on probably SSI, you might not have the means, depending on your financial situation, to just remodel your whole house, especially when you're at that age. Some could argue, what's the point,
yeah.
right? So it's
Kind of
definitely something tricky.
kind of off topic, but not. I'm really interested to see where assistive technology and devices go in general
Yeah.
after Neuralink is kind of more prevalent and approved.
Oh, right. Break that down in the neural link. That's crazy.
I,
It's
I can't. I'm not that smart. Like I don't know a whole lot about it. I just know it's a chip, not the kind that you eat, that goes into your brain, and you're able to. It's essentially like an Alexa in your brain, is the best way I can think of describing it
oh,
based on
okay.
my limited knowledge.
I've seen electromuscular. I forget what it's essentially this little band, this headpiece that you wear on your head, and it uses electrical signals and the muscles in your face and all that to do a bunch of stuff.
Hmm.
Right. I've seen that. I'm not sure if that's a prototype of that.
Maybe.
I know that technology is around the corner too.
Yeah.
Especially for people that are missing limbs,
Hmm.
like those. I know there's like Project Skywalker. It's like the group of people out there that are making a super advanced hand. But again, the biggest barrier of entry to this kind of stuff is just money, finances,
Yeah.
because
So
there's no mass production or assembly line or any super efficient way of mass producing these accessibility devices because they're so new. And for a lot of these, even like eye gaze, it could still get better.
mhm.
I know it's come a long ways, but it could still get better. Text to speech, speech to text, it could still get better. Then now there's AI and face recognition. I know your laptop has face
Yeah.
recognition.
Yeah, no, I was showing Uriel my what are they called? Pointer actions, I think, on
Yeah,
MacBooks.
yeah.
Yeah, they're cool because you can just click or blink your eyes per se, or twitch like your mouth to one side or the other, like smirk. And the camera in the MacBook will recognize that facial motion, and you can assign that facial motion that it reads in the camera to like a button click, like the left mouse button, the right mouse button. You can even get really specific with it and make certain facial expressions equal, hold and drag something on the computer. And so, I think it's really cool. And I'm sure a lot of people get a lot of use out of stuff like that. Me, I can use the trackpad and like a regular mouse easily enough. I was kind of hoping it would work out so that I could use it to help me game on my laptop a little easier. There are some games I play on my laptop that I mentioned, like Poke MMO. Another game that I love that's not yet on console, or at least not updated, is 7 Days to Die, another survival game set in like a zombie apocalypse. And I was hoping I'd be able to use the pointer actions, the facial expressions, to be able to click a little bit easier, freeing up my hands to use the keyboard buttons because there's just a lot of ground to cover on the keyboard for that game to play it well. And I don't have a lot of movement in my hand, obviously. And so to, stretch one finger to move the mouse pad and another finger to use the space bar and two other fingers for moving my player with WASD, it's a lot. And so I was hoping I could use the facial expressions to take some of the stress off my hands, but it doesn't work with Steam games, it seems. It works if you're using like a regular browser, like I use Mozilla Firefox and I had no issues clicking with the facial expressions. But as soon as I booted up Steam and 7 Days to Die, it would register the click in game so I could, click the left mouse button with my face. But the problem was it wouldn't recognize me actually moving the mouse and the camera within the game.
Which is a shame.
Yeah. So it
Right.
wasn't playable.
Yeah, that I think that's more on Steam's end. It's just not they haven't really updated
It could be
their
like,
software or
yeah, and I don't think Steam is just super compatible with Macs in the first place.
right. It's just one of those things where as accessibility options become better in video games, it's going to be harder to program around these kinds of things.
Right.
Like, I know this is a separate discussion, but back in the day, we would have discussions where as video games get graphically more complicated, we're also expecting them to get more complicated when in terms of dialogue, animation, combat depth,
Gameplay mechanics.
environmental, right. And then on top of that, all these accessibility options, especially with these gaming companies having really short crunch times. It's really difficult, really daunting to
Yeah.
make a AAA game that has all these things and like execute them well.
Right.
Right. Ragnarok did, I believe
Yeah.
it did really well, but
Like I got fatigued playing Ragnarok,
it's a lot
but
going on, a lot of little
I
guys.
yeah, I think I got more fatigued playing Jedi Survivor in general. So that's just my take. Um, at the end of the day, we kind of thought we should ask ourselves for this episode, what is the end goal for assistive technology?
Oh yeah.
And I think we're in the right direction, like we've kind of touched on earlier. I think the end goal should be to just in general increase the quality of people with disabilities lives, or the people that rely on assistive technology. It's like I said, I try to find a balance between using assistive technology like Sire and my Alexa to type and turn lights on and stuff, but at the same time I don't want my technology to enable me into losing my mobility with my SMA. And so I think it's important for people that use assistive technology to think about what that means for themselves. Because, yes, you want help and you probably need help with certain things, but I think it's important to physically do what you can as much as you can. And so, with regards to the end goal for assistive technology, I think it should give you the opportunity to help you where you need it. And that's that.
All right. I think we're done. Any thoughts?
I think, just to kind of reiterate what we've been talking about, that there's a plethora of assistive technology devices at our disposal. But as we talked about today, there's a lot of barriers, including money and, set up, needing external help from somebody to set up. So accessible devices are only accessible if you have the money to purchase them and somebody to help you set them up, which to an extent can defeat the purpose. But I think we're definitely moving in the right direction. I think that the Sony accessible controller is an even further step in the right direction from the Xbox controller, because to keep in mind, Xbox was like the first mainstream kind of access controller put out on the market. And
Yeah, it's a bit of an arms race,
mm,
a bit of an arms race, who can make the best accessible controller,
yeah,
you know?
I think it's time for Steam to step up and make an accessible controller. They're the only ones that haven't yet, right? Maybe they can tip their hat into the ring.
Yeah, right now they got their Steam Deck thing, but
Yeah,
that's not really an accessible controller. That's a more powerful Nintendo Switch, but
yeah,
specifically for Steam and Steam
right.
games, I think is the best way to describe it.
Yeah.
Well, anything's gonna be stronger than the Nintendo, even a toaster, probably. No shade towards Nintendo, but
I'd love to see that. But on that note, I think we'll end it there. As always, if you liked what we had to say today, please leave us a rating, perhaps a nice little review, and be sure to share with your friends and family online. If you're not already, be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at The Disability Myth, all one word. Any final thoughts, bro?
bye.
Peace and love, and may the force be with you.
Ah.